and it's very pleasant to fish. Well, I sat there for a few minutes now and nothing happened. I've actually just caught on a piece of weed there. There's some lilies. Although I can see lilies on the surface, there's obviously one or two under the water as well, which you can't see, and I think the bait just caught on one of those lilies as I came back. Keep flicking a few grains of hemp down the middle. I'll have one more go on the worm. And if you don't get a bite on the fire bank, doesn't mean to say they're not there. They could possibly be there, but they're not quite prepared to feed. So I'll give it another few minutes, and then what I will do is just cup a little bit more bait in. And I cup it in rather than throw it in, simply because it's more accurate. You can put the grain bait in the right place. So I'll give it a few more minutes, and if I don't get a bite, I'll cup a bit more bait in, and just keep my eye on it. And if we see any signs of activity, we'll go back over later. Take care when you ship out fishing the fire bank that you don't actually drop the tackle into the fire bank lilies, because obviously fishing with a heavier line, it can be a bit of a pain, or it can be a bit awkward to get out of the lilies if you should snag up. No, there's a very small fish taking that. And look at that, a very small rudd. It's taking a worm which is nearly as long as the rudd. Just shows how greedy some of these fish can be at times. Just need the disgorger to unhook that. So I'm going to put the heavy pole down, put the hook in the butt, put the heavy pole down. And see if I can catch a few more roach. What's interesting when you fish the hemp is that you very often start off with a few small roach, and as the session progresses they sometimes get bigger, so hopefully we should catch a few larger specimens. There's some roach in this canal up to 2 pounds. But it's very rare to see them. But you can certainly catch fish up to 10 or 12 ounce fairly regularly on the hemp. If you're going to put some grain bait across, remember to put all the pole together first, because you don't want to ship halfway across with some grain bait or bait in the cup and then remember that you've got to put the rest of the sections on the pole. The cup I use is actually homemade, and there are many cups on the market, but this one is simply an aerosol spray top arrow-dited to a clothes peg. Now what could be simpler? I like it because some of the models on the market aren't particularly easy to actually clip onto the pole, and this simply clips on with a piece of rubber so it doesn't spin, and off we go. Some people keep a spare top section with a cup actually arrow-dited to the pole section. With this method what it means is you can actually use the same pole and the same rigs you're fishing with and just clip it on. Just ensure that you've got a piece of rubber fitted around top of each pole, and you can use any rig. There we go, so I've cut some more casters across. I'll just keep my eye on that and see what happens. This canal today, or these days, is used as a part of the water supply system. It ends up in Durley Reservoir, which supplies drinking water for Bridgwater. So as a consequence, they actually pump it into the reservoir, and some days it can be flowing much faster than others. Today actually there's very little flow on it, so I can only assume they're not abstracting water for Durley today. Ship out the pole and remember to take the other pieces off, or otherwise I'll be too far across. I just caught a piece of weed. As I've shipped out there, I've just caught a piece of weed on the hook. Inevitably it will have come off by the time we come back. There we go. It always does. So let's go out again. And by feeding a few grains of hemp while you're fishing across, it should enable you to catch almost immediately when you go back out again. Let's see what happens. I've been feeding a bit there. The float should go under fairly quickly, hopefully. And there we go, look at that. First time in on the hemp, those fish are still there. Although the roach come up in the water and take some of this hemp as it's falling through the water, obviously quite a number of the grains, look at that, that's a lovely roach. They are getting slightly bigger. As you're feeding the hemp, the fish come up in the water and take it, but there's a number of grains are always going to fall to the bottom. And as a consequence, the roach tend to stay in the swim much longer with hemp than they do with other baits. If you use maggots or pinkies, they tend to disappear into the bottom mud, whereas obviously the hemp just lays out on the bed of the canal. We're going to try and catch a few more roach on the hemp, and hopefully we'll get one or two better fish as we get into the session, because normally you catch the smaller fish early and then the bigger fish will show up. The wind's changed slightly and it's coming into my face, which is actually making the presentation slightly difficult, and it's hampering the feeding of the hemp. It's not going out quite as far, but it's probably going far enough, and it's nice to see the sun's actually breaking through. Now that wind has picked up, we're still getting plenty of bites from the roach, but the wind is blowing straight into my face, so there's a better roach. I think I'll just slip the net under that one. Look at that, what a lovely roach. Look at that. Beautiful fish, slightly bigger than the others, and you can see the lateral line all the way down the side there. Not big, but 2 or 3 ounces, bigger than most that we've caught today. I've been keeping my eye on the far bank, but doesn't seem to be a lot of activity over there at the moment. I'm just going to go over and feed again in a few minutes. I'll just catch a few more roach if I can, and then I'm going to feed over there. Just need to drop the float in position now, because when it's in the air it's blowing back towards me. If the wind keeps picking up like this, I'm going to have to start using a catapult to actually feed the hemp, which is a little bit more difficult, but it means I'm going to be feeding in the right place. I've actually missed a couple of bites as well. Because the wind's blowing in the face, it's just slightly, apart from hooking in my trousers, it's just bowing the line slightly towards me, and it's dragging the float off line slightly. And because all the hemp that you throw in obviously goes downstream in the flow of the canal in a straight line, and if the float is coming back towards you slightly, then it's quite possible that, because the presentation isn't quite right, that the fish are a bit more wary of the one on the hook, and as a consequence you'll probably miss a few more bites. It's important to lay it out in a straight line and try and get it to run through in a straight line. And that wind's just died a fraction and the float is going through quite nicely, so we should get a bite. There we are. straight away. As soon as the float was going through properly, not a big fish, but just by getting that presentation right, I just caught another one. Just going to see if I catch one more, and then I'm going to put some more feed over because it looks, I keep looking over there and it looks rather quiet over there, so I'm just going to go and cut some more feed in. Let's have one more put in on the pole here for the roach. Try and lay it out in a line. It's certainly warmed up a bit now, and the sun's coming through, but there's still a bit of cloud about, so it could encourage the tench to feed maybe. There's certainly no shortage of little roach feeding there on the hemp. I'm just going to, remembering to put my pole together first, I'm just going to cup some more feed across. I'll just put a few casters in the cup again. Feeding with the cup is a very accurate way of feeding, and probably more so when it's windy, because it would be almost impossible to catapult casters in a small area in amongst the lilies accurately. So I'm going to cup some in, but sometimes I feel that when you cup the bait in, it's actually in a very small area, and sometimes you want it to cover a slightly bigger area. So one way to do it is simply to, when you put the pole over the swim, rather than just put it over the swim and upturn it and empty the contents, is just hold the pole about a yard off the water, and you can spread the bait and spread it about in a slightly bigger area. It's only a little bit bigger, but it might just make a difference. But look at that, just went to feed some casters, and I've caught a fish on a bare hook. Look at that, that is one of these infamous motherless minnows. And apparently now they've had the name changed, and they're officially called sun bleak. And in some respects they're like a bleak, in that you can see they've got a protruding bottom lip. So in theory they're meant to be surface feeders, but having said that, they seem to feed at all depths obviously, and they're not averse to taking bare hooks at times. Let's put him in the net. It's remarkable that you can catch sun bleak on bare hooks and you can't catch them on a piece of hemp. Slip another piece on. Remember to shorten the pole, take the 3 sections off, and then we're fishing in exactly the same place again. That float is going through nicely now, and it looks as if the flow is just picked up very slightly actually. There's another fish. When using light lines, it's always very important to use an elastic, and they obviously come in varying strengths. Today I'm using a number 4 elastic. The elastics go from number 1, which is a very, very soft elastic, up to 16s and 18s, which are used for carp fishing. The number 4 elastic is medium strength elastic, and I use that on the canal because although I'm fishing with a fine line, catching large numbers of fish, it's far quicker to use an elastic which doesn't stretch too much. It still gives you the buffer when you strike, and it comes out quite easily. So it acts as a nice buffer, but what it means is that you can swing the fish to hand. So when you catch the odd fish of 3 or 4 ounces, you don't always use the landing net. You can just lift them out. Whereas if you use a lighter elastic, such as a 2 or maybe a 1, whilst there's no danger of bumping fish, it's actually slower, because you do need to net a lot more. I've seen 1 or 2 bubbles coming up actually on that far line, so we'll give it a couple of minutes since cupping in. And, I'll give it a couple more minutes, and I'm going to go across before this wind gets too strong and see if we can catch a tench. Now there's a better roach. Slightly better, worth putting the net under. It's probably the biggest fish we've caught today so far. Probably 4 ounces. And you can see with these slightly larger roach that they just tend to get a dark hue along the back. They're not quite silver, they're starting to go black. The lovely orange fins, but you can see, stay still, you can see it just tends to get a slightly darker all the way around the back. And that's a lovely fish. Look carefully in the net before it jumps in. And there's a few bubbles coming up, so I'm just going to go across now and see if we can catch a tench. Where you just pole down out of the way to avoid any bicycles, keep it down the towpath. Now I said that I had a number 4 elastic on the other rig fishing for the roach. This is a much heavier rig, it was a tench rig as already said, and in this one I've got a number 10 elastic, which is a much stronger elastic, which breaks at 5 or 6 pounds and much more difficult to pull out. It's soft enough so that when you strike you won't bump any fish, but what it does mean is that when you hook a big fish you can obviously pull a lot harder. It's very important because if you're fishing across in the lilies, the first thing that's going to happen when you hook a fish is it's going to try and swim in there. And if you use an elastic which is too soft, although you can pull hard, what actually happens is the elastic just stretches more and the fish goes in the lilies, and once it's in there you're never going to get it out. So initially when you get a bite you need to